Next up, surprisingly here, and again, blame DraftKings for this order. It's not something that I think is necessarily correct, but they actually have Alabama at minus 160 to make the playoff, plus 140 to miss. I did take a piece of that plus 140 this morning to miss, and we'll be adding that to the Bud's Bets column after the show. Do you guys think Alabama is more likely than not to make the playoff? Like a minus 160 line is curious to me. It implies either that a two-loss Alabama has a more significant chance of making the playoff than I expect that it does, or it implies that maybe they'll be favored over Georgia. And right now, I have Georgia favored by 2.8 over Alabama on a neutral site. You can argue the Georgia Dome might not be a neutral site. Probably have a couple more Georgia fans there, but Bama fans don't exactly return their tickets to ticket allotment. So it's not much of a home field, if at all. Maybe like 0.1, maybe 0.2 if you wanted to go there and do that, but I really kind of doubt it. And I would not make that adjustment. So let's go ahead and dive into Alabama here a little bit. A couple things stand out, and they're just sort of stuff that Nick Saban teams typically don't mess up. But there's some drive killers on the offensive side. And then on the defensive side, which is where I want to start, Alabama has some issues that have been exposed at times this year. They are not allowing the explosive play, right? That is true. They are doing a really good job of not allowing especially through the air. Their explosive pass defense is really strong, and their explosive rush defense overall, despite what happened against A&M, is still elite. However, I do want to note that their short and intermediate pass defense this year is just kind of leaky. They allow more completions in that short and intermediate area than they typically do. Nick Saban teams are not really exposed like this. They're still getting off the field reasonably well on third and long, but normally like 3rd and 6 against the Nick Saban defense, you're off the field. You're punting or you're turning it over. They're blitzing you. They're forcing the ball out of your hand. They're playing that tight man-match coverage, and they're getting off the field. This year, though, that's just not been the case. Florida was able to throw the ball on them okay. Zach Calzada threw the ball on them all right in those situations. They handled Ole Miss well, much to their credit. They handled Miami, but they're just not elite in that short and intermediate pass coverage range right now, and that is something that is allowing opponents to stay on the field more, right? If that makes sense. Like they normally force more 3-and-outs than they do currently, and that's just something that concerns me. I don't know how many other teams on their schedule can take advantage of that. Georgia throws the ball fairly well in the short and intermediate, so potentially something there. But yeah, they are allowing too high of a completion percentage this year. I think if we're looking for things that could trip them up, that could prevent them from actually getting back to the playoff and winning it all, I think some of it is their linebacker, to be honest. Like I've seen some, I thought Bama's linebackers are going to be better this year in pass coverage than they've been. And maybe that's on me for not properly evaluating them, or maybe that's on them. Maybe they're not playing to their potential. Maybe that's coaching. Maybe that's some combination of all three. But they've not been quite as good. Now, on the offensive side, their overall numbers are still really, really strong, to their credit. I know they're a top 5 defense or top 5 offense in pretty much all of the power metrics, but there's just a couple things they do. And we talked about this with Ohio State after the loss to Oregon, right? Ohio State put up 600-something yards in that loss, which is crazy. But ultimately, they didn't do some of the small things, and look, to respond to the comments here, I know they have multiple injuries at linebacker. If they can get some guys back healthy at linebacker, or maybe some of their starters get healthier, that can certainly help. Will Anderson has been an absolute freak on the defensive side, rushing the passer. They could use a little more pass rush depth, I think. But overall, like, Bama's pressure rate is still pretty good. They're still top 15 in the country in sack rate. It's not that bad. Let's talk about Bama's offense, though, because there's some small things that this offense does that I think are holding it down a little bit, and which could trip it up in games, although I'm pretty bullish on this offense overall. One thing is that their third and short, especially running the football, has been really poor. Notably, they had some third and shorts down in the red area against Texas A&M and against Florida, 2 games which I think they should have lost. And I mean, obviously, one of them they did. Uh, their stuff rate allowed in that area of the field is very high. They're not converting third and short running the football very well. Their third and short conversion rate passing the football is a little bit better. So maybe they need to trust Bryce Young to throw more in those situations. But I also am concerned at the number of times they are allowing free runners at the quarterback, right? I would define free runners as unblocked guys who are not accounted for who are accounted for in the protection scheme, but they just don't get blocked. So it's either an Olay or some type of protection bust. I know Florida was able to scheme some of those open. A&M was able to scheme quite a few of those open. And that is concerning. Like the number of plays where Bryce Young just has absolutely, no time to throw because there's immediate pressure in his face is a bit problematic to me. And I think that's something quite obviously here. There's a couple teams left who can do this to you. Auburn has a pretty damn good defense. They could create free runners, I think, on Bryce Young. Georgia absolutely can create some free runners on Bryce Young. And those are difficult things to deal with as an offense. We really saw that in the A&M game. A&M kind of schemed up and gamed those protections in a way that you typically don't see with an Alabama offensive line. They are actually outside the top 100 in pressure rate allowed so far this year. Now, to Bryce's credit, he gets rid of the ball better than that pressure rate implies, and he doesn't take a whole lot of sacks relative to the pressure rate. But here's something else. Teams are generating this pressure on Alabama without having to actually send a whole lot of blitzers. That to me is concerning. Bama is like bottom third in blitzes faced per dropback, and that's not great, right? That's certainly problematic there because that means you're able to play against this Alabama offense with more coverage defenders on the back end, and that has really impacted Alabama's explosive play rate this year. It's not nearly what it was last year or even in some previous years. Another good indication of this is how often are you scoring explosive plays, touchdowns, first downs on first down, right? Normally that's a great down to throw on. And Alabama last year just absolutely crushed people throwing the football on first down. This year, they are still throwing the football on first down, right? Like it's not like they're not trusting Bryce Young to do it. So what's happening? Well, what we're seeing here is that teams are playing more too high against Alabama. They're not quite as scared of the run game. And because they're not having to blitz, they can play more of those defenders back. And ultimately, that is preventing Alabama from having some of the explosive plays that it would normally have. How do you fix this? You got to find a way to run the ball a little bit better. You got to become more deadly, throw in some of those short passes, I guess. But ultimately, you got to get your protections right up front. New offensive line coach, new offensive coordinator, a lot of new pieces there. Certainly some issues were expected. I think there's a reason Danny Cannell bet the under on the 11.5 wins for Alabama this year, which is looking really smart right now because they could even lose again before they get to the Dome, although I don't think that's super likely. But you see these like little issues that a lot of these do come back to the offensive line, and I think some of the coaching and the issues with some of the chemistry on the offense right now. Still a really good team, still easily a top 5 team in college football for me, maybe even a little bit better on the power rankings. But again, this segment is all about nitpicking and trying to accomplish that.